The Statue of Liberty is a colossal neoclassical sculpture on Liberty Island in New York Harbor. It is of a robed female figure representing Libertas, the Roman goddess of freedom. This statue was a gift to the United States from the people of France and dedicated in 1886. In her left hand she holds the Declaration of Independence, in her right hand a torch, symbolizing the Enlightenment. A broken chain lies at her feet, symbolizing freedom from bondage and oppression. The 7 spikes represent the 7 seas and 7 continents where liberty should be spread. Lady Liberty, as it is sometimes called, is a cherished symbol of freedom and a welcoming sign to immigrants arriving from abroad. There are many who believe seafaring peoples of the past, such as the Phoenicians, who have nautical records that stretch back to 1600 BC, could have, and some say did, travel to the New World. It is also known that Norse explorer Leif Erikson set foot in the Americas long before 1492, having pulled his Viking longboat into the shallows off modern Newfoundland. It was a speculative proposal to reach the East Indies by sailing westward. The European explorers of the 1400s were looking for a new route for the spice trade with Asia. It was the voyages of Columbus and his arrival in 1492 which led to the first lasting European contact with the Americas. In the 16 and 1700s, immigrants began arriving in large numbers from Europe. These immigrants were primarily the people of the British Isles, also Germans, Dutch, and African slaves. The people were mostly settlers looking to escape poverty and oppression, claim available farmland, and participate in growing trade. In the 17th century, nearly 2/3 of the settlers to the New World from the British Isles came as indentured servants. The captain would transport them to the American colonies and sell their legal papers to someone who needed workers. Several instances of kidnapping for transportation to the Americas are also recorded. The servants were not paid wages, but were provided with food, clothing, and a place to live. The indenture document specified how many years the servant would be required to work. At the end of the indenture, the young person was given a new suit of clothes and was free to leave. Many set out to begin their own farms, while others used their newly acquired skills to pursue a trade. It was this wave of immigration that led to the establishment of the original 13 colonies. In 1682, William Penn drew up a Charter of Liberties for the colony of Pennsylvania, simply called a Frame of Government. This new charter guaranteed free and fair trial by jury, freedom of religion, freedom from unjust imprisonment, and free elections. The democratic principles he set forth in the Pennsylvania Frame of Government served as an inspiration for the United States Constitution. William Penn had also drawn up an effective treaty with the Native Americans, and, as an earlier supporter of colonial unification, he wrote and urged for a union of all the English colonies. Penn also promoted good treatment for slaves and encouraged citizens to take part in making the laws of the colony. The citizens were proud of the liberty that Penn had given them. When the Speaker for the Pennsylvania Assembly ordered a new bell for the State House, he asked that a Bible verse be placed on the bell. Proclaim liberty throughout all the land, unto all inhabitants thereof. Leviticus 25:10. Another means for making a living in the New World was through apprenticeships. One such apprentice was a German immigrant named John Peter Zenger. He worked as a printer's apprentice to William Bradford, who was the printer of the New York Gazette, the official royal paper, which said only what the English governor wanted. He apprenticed for 8 years, eventually setting up his own print shop in New York City, where he began printing the New York Weekly. As an alternative to the royal paper, the Weekly began printing criticizing words of the British governor, William Cosby, an unpopular man, some say rigged elections and took bribes for people's land. The British governor became furious over these writings and had Zenger arrested and sent to jail for almost 10 months. Just before his trial, the governor had Zenger's lawyers disbarred from law, and the court assigned him a young lawyer with little or no experience. Some of Zenger's friends made a secret trip to Philadelphia and contacted Andrew Hamilton, who was one of the most famous lawyers of the colonies. The day of the trial, Hamilton makes a surprise appearance at the courthouse. As the trial begins, the Attorney General, who was the governor's lawyer, said Zenger was guilty of libel. Andrew Hamilton said many things, among them, "Free men have a right to complain when hurt. They have a right to oppose arbitrary power by speaking and writing truths. There is no libel if the truth is told." The opposition tried to defer decision to the judge, but Hamilton insisted that the jury must decide. The jury deliberated, and it was decided that John Peter Zenger was not guilty. It was this legal triumph for liberty by Andrew Hamilton that laid the foundation for American press freedom. In 1764, the Stamp Act was passed by the British Parliament. This act levied a tax on colonial legal documents, licenses, port clearances, newspapers, cards, and dice. As soon as they heard about the law, American colonists began complaining that this was a new form of taxation without their consent. A group of 9 Boston craftsmen and shopkeepers, later known as the Loyal Nine, gathered in December of 1765 to write a letter to the stamp officer appointed to Massachusetts. This letter demanded that he appear at noon the next day at the Liberty Tree to publicly resign his office. It was there the stamp officer was tarred and feathered and forced to resign. Their organization had succeeded, and historians have characterized the Stamp Act crisis as the colonists' first step toward revolution. British Parliament soon repealed the Stamp Act before the crisis could explode, but the Loyal Nine, later known as the Sons of Liberty or Liberty Boys, now had the benefit of training, communication, organization, and the occasional reliance on force. The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. Thomas Jefferson. Boston patriot Samuel Adams is often credited as being the founder and leader of the Sons of Liberty. The Sons of Liberty were influential in organizing and carrying out the Boston Tea Party. This famous historical event occurred in 1773 when colonists boarded 3 merchant ships of taxed tea, destroying the cargo and throwing it into Boston Harbor, their motto being, "No taxation without representation." Groups identifying themselves as the Sons of Liberty sprouted up in almost every colony. The organization spread month by month. Samuel Adams helped their cause by printing protest information in the Boston Gazette under a different pen name. British authorities attempted to denigrate the Sons of Liberty by referring to them as the Sons of Violence. Guard with jealous attention the public liberty. Suspect everyone who approaches that jewel. Unfortunately, nothing will preserve it but downright force. Whenever you give up that force, you are inevitably ruined. Patrick Henry. Communication between colonies by the Sons of Liberty allowed for decisive action against British Parliament's Townshend Act of 1768. One by one, the Liberty Boys groups penned agreements limiting trade with Britain and imposing a highly effective boycott against importation and sale of British goods. The Sons of Liberty were also responsible for the looting and burning of a British customs schooner that had been enforcing unpopular trade regulations in 1772. In many cases, the public meetings of the Sons of Liberty turned violent. As such, British authorities often fell victim to the volatile nature of mobs. In New York City, the Sons of Liberty put up a Liberty Pole to stand as a testament to their resolve. The British soldiers would tear it down almost as soon as it was put up. This back-and-forth action resulted in many skirmishes between the two sides. Most notably was the Battle of Golden Hill in 1770, when many people were injured and at least one was killed. The Boston Massacre was a street fight that occurred on March 5, 1770, between a Liberty mob throwing snowballs, stones, and sticks at a squad of British soldiers. Many colonists were killed. This massacre led directly to the royal governor evacuating his occupying army from the town of Boston. At a cost of many lives, the people of Boston were liberated. Violent struggles over Liberty Poles raged for 9 years after the repeal of the Stamp Act in 1766. The 13 colonies had been collaborating, beginning with the Albany Congress of 1754, to demand their rights and set up their own Continental Congress. The First Continental Congress was assembled in Philadelphia in 1774, appointing George Washington Commander-in-Chief. It was in April of 1775 when the Sons of Liberty and their revolutionary New York Provincial Congress gained control of New York City government. It was then, in 1776, that they declared independence from Great Britain and formed the United States of America. Fourscore and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Abraham Lincoln. The old Pennsylvania State House bell was first called the Liberty Bell by a group trying to abolish slavery. These abolitionists remembered the words on the bell and in the 1830s adopted it as a symbol of their cause. Slavery was abolished in America with the passage of the 13th Amendment in 1865 in what could be called the greatest victory for liberty in the history of the United States. Is life so dear or peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. Patrick Henry. Beginning in the late 1800s, the Liberty Bell traveled around the country to exhibitions and fairs in an attempt to heal the divisions of the Civil War. It reminded Americans of earlier days when they fought and worked together for their independence from Great Britain. Disobedience is the true foundation of liberty. The obedient must be slaves. Henry David Thoreau.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This is what's known as the Pledge of Allegiance. Every day in America, this mechanically repeated affirmation is recited in schools across the nation at the beginning of every school day. Written in 1892, its author, Francis Bellamy, had considered using the words equality and fraternity, but decided against it, knowing that the State Education Committee was against equality for women and African Americans. The pledge was created with the intention of encouraging children to worship the state and revere centralized authority. The Pledge of Allegiance originally began with a military salute that was then extended out toward the flag. The pledge salute was the origin of the U.S. military salute and adopted decades later by the Nazi Party. Liberty has never come from government. Liberty has always come from the subjects of it. The history of liberty is a history of limitations of governmental power, not the increase of it. Woodrow Wilson. Does reciting the Pledge of Allegiance unconsciously influence a child to revere centralized authority, making them easier to control? Is blind devotion to concentrated power the best thing for a person seeking liberty? It was June 4th, 1963, when President John F. Kennedy signed an executive order giving the federal government, specifically the Treasury Department, the constitutional power to create and issue currency without going through the privately owned Federal Reserve Bank. It was this legislation that many believe led to his untimely death by assassination less than 6 months later. It has been said that JFK wanted liberty for Americans from the power of the Federal Reserve Bank, and for that he paid the ultimate price with his life. The man who controls Britain's money supply controls the British Empire, and I control the British money supply. Nathan Rothschild. Women didn't have the right to vote in America until 1920, with the passage of the 19th Amendment, almost 150 years after the birth of our nation. African American men were given the right to vote with the 15th Amendment in 1870. However, it wasn't until the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that Congress outlawed discriminatory literacy tests that prevented many African Americans from voter registration. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Martin Luther King, Jr. What about today? How confident are we in the authenticity of today's voting results? Are the election numbers really legitimate, or is there the possibility of manipulation? Is there a reason the paper ballot is being phased out, making it harder to detect election fraud? Aren't the new voter ID laws in essence a poll tax which restricts the elderly and the poor? The paper ballot must be made mandatory. Voter ID laws must be banned, and the Electoral College must be eliminated. A Gallup poll shows that 62% of U.S. adults would support amending the Constitution to replace the Electoral College, which has allowed popular vote losers to move into the White House. Our voting rights must be protected for liberty to survive in America, so that we may have a truly fair and honest election. Social order at the expense of liberty is hardly a bargain. Marquis de Sade. The 2000 election of George W. Bush versus Al Gore was a close presidential race. It was eventually determined that Al Gore won the popular vote and should have been elected president. However, the Supreme Court halted a recount and appointed George W. Bush the position. It was this election result, more than any other in recent modern history, that has outraged Americans and eroded the confidence in today's political system. Many Americans even declared Bush to be King George, a monarch who wasn't actually elected president by the American people. The natural progress of things is for liberty to yield, and government to gain ground. Thomas Jefferson. Assuming that election results are totally legitimate, does the common citizen even have a candidate in the race, or are the leading candidates simply puppet men for the corporations? The history of liberty is a history of resistance. Woodrow Wilson. Ronald Reagan was a screen actor before he became president. Some say he was the first in a list of presidential actors carrying out policies dictated by the powers of big business. Concentrated power has always been the enemy of liberty. Ronald Reagan. Since the attacks of 9/11, American governmental policies have gone into a state of paranoia, and our liberties are being systematically taken away. In October of 2001, 1 month after 9/11, George W. Bush signs into law the USA Patriot Act. With the stroke of a pen, our freedom and rights are taken away, saying goodbye to the liberty we had been given by the forefathers of our nation. Government may now monitor religious and political activity without suspecting any criminal action. Government has closed public immigration hearings and secretly detained hundreds of people without charges. Government may monitor prison conversations between attorneys and clients and deny lawyers to Americans accused of crimes. Government may search and seize property and belongings without probable cause to assist in an investigation. Government may jail Americans indefinitely without a trial and without being charged with an offense. These new laws are in direct contradiction to the U.S. Constitution's first 10 amendments, also known as the Bill of Rights. Rule by fear is nothing new in history, but is fast becoming the order of the day in modern America. We must all stand and fight together to repeal the Patriot Act to preserve the original vision that our nation's founders had for our country. Those who would give up essential liberty to obtain a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. Benjamin Franklin. The money and power of large corporations and banks are now largely what controls the policies of today's politicians. Do the citizens of the United States control our government, or has it already merged with the corporations? Fascism should more properly be called corporatism, because it is the merger of state and corporate power. Benito Mussolini. The U.S. military juggernaut has become so large and far-reaching, it is now considered by many to be beyond the control of Congress and the executive branch. Have the citizens of the United States lost control over their government like a runaway train that we are powerless to stop? Overgrown military establishments are under any form of government inauspicious to liberty and are to be regarded as particularly hostile to Republican liberty. George Washington. In America today, corporations hire public relations firms to shape the image of their companies and their products through the media. Public relations firms create prepackaged news stories, especially in times of legal trouble, hiding the truth and feeding the public a steady diet of deception. Early founder of PR, Edward Bernays, famously wrote about public relations, saying it is scientifically designed to manipulate the thinking and behavior of a herd-like public. One example of an early public relations disinformation strategy was for DDT. This insecticide, later shown to cause human and environmental damage, was initially presented to the public to be safe and healthy. Biologist Rachel Carson wrote the book Silent Spring, questioning the widespread use of DDT and outlining its disastrous effects on the environment. Accumulating in the soil and in the food chain, DDT can reach toxic levels among animal populations as far away as the Arctic. The ban of DDT in 1972 is credited as helping the return of the bald eagle from near extinction with its diet of aquatic life. When companies damage the environment and endanger the health of the public, we must bring these cases to the courtrooms where changes can be made to protect the public. Through massive funding and an effective media campaign, the food industry halted legislation in 2012 that would have required labeling of products made with genetically modified ingredients. Genetically modified seeds bring non-native species to areas where they are intrusive to native plants, leading to less ecodiversity and more dependence on seed monopolies. When farmers aren't allowed to plant last year's seeds because they are subjected to intellectual property law, this creates a dependence which increases farming costs and introduces more non-natural plants to the ecosystem. The genetically modified food industry knows the truth about other health risks, including toxic side effects, that they will continue to hide through the use of public relations and disinformation. We must fight for the health of our planet, which will in turn create better health for its people. It's time for America to return to its roots and return to natural methods. Through the use of natural seeds and organic farming methods, this will protect farms, ecosystems, and families. Every effort must be made to create GMO labeling laws to protect consumers and allow Americans to vote with their dollars. Another injustice to personal liberty and public health is the adding of fluoride to the water supply. This barbaric practice, now banned in countries around the world due to its toxicity and fictitious health claims, is still being used in America today, thanks to the corporations and the deception of public relations. The corrupt practices of Wall Street, predatory lending, and the subprime mortgage scandal imploded the economy in 2007 and contributed to financial loss for Americans. The Glass-Steagall Act, enacted during the Great Depression that was designed to protect consumers, was quietly dismantled in 1999 by the banking industry. It was the deregulation of this industry that contributed to massive banking bailouts in 2008 that skyrocketed the national debt, making rich men richer and all at the public's expense. By reinstating the Glass-Steagall Act, re-regulating the industry, and bringing bankers to the courtrooms, we can stop the bleeding of the finances of today's and tomorrow's citizens. Another affront to the people of America is collusion by the oil industry. Much as egg industry lawsuits revealed the restriction of production to inflate egg prices, the oil industry deliberately closes refineries and reduces inventories in order to generate higher prices. It is only through strategic litigation that America can regulate the oil industry, for where there's money, there's power, and where there's power, you will find corruption. Another battleground for liberty in America today is the cost of education. Better education contributes to lower unemployment, saves money on social programs, and contributes to higher tax revenue. By regulating the tuition policies of profit-driven colleges and helping to protect funding for public schools and state colleges, Americans can receive the education they need to find better jobs and provide for their families. With so many areas to focus our attention to protect personal liberty, perhaps none is more important than today's cost of health care. Americans now spend more on health care annually than the next 10 wealthiest countries combined. A trip to the hospital in a so-called poorer country, the first question you're asked is, what is the problem? For the very same visit in America today, the first question you're asked is, do you have insurance? With 1,000% markups on hospital supplies and CEOs making millions, it's an industry rampant with runaway profit. It is only through our efforts to create price restrictions and regulations that Americans can afford the health care they need to live healthy lives. These are the front lines in the fight for liberty in America today. We must think as the Sons of Liberty did to unite our resources through communication and decisive action. We must look to whistleblowers within organizations to spot corruption and target legislation. By listening to whistleblowers, we can see behind the veil of secrecy, because the truth is harder to see from the outside thanks to effective public relations. In the modern era of the 21st century, the Internet has become a powerful tool for people to mobilize against tyranny and corruption. There is hope for the common citizen, however, the challenges to support personal liberty will remain indefinitely. By studying the life and teachings of Martin Luther King Jr. and Mahatma Gandhi, the common citizen can learn the use of passive resistance and learn not to rely on force to create social change. When the people fear the government, there is tyranny. When the government fears the people, there is liberty. Thomas Jefferson. Nothing is permanent in the world of law and politics, and victories toward liberty must be carefully safeguarded. Through an organized effort and the use of civil disobedience, the oppressors in today's society can still be defeated. Liberty means responsibility. That is why most men dread it. George Bernard Shaw. The use of petitions and rallies must be specific to focus on the problem and, more importantly, the exact solution where the law must be changed, created, or enforced. New legislation can then be initiated, ratified, and put into law. We must remember the Liberty Tree and go out on a limb with our friends and fellow citizens to fight for our rights to improve the quality of life for all the people of our nation.